It's exhausting to think a laminate badge and a clipboard give them the right to steal your stuff. I mean, it literally makes my blood boil just thinking about the way that bright orange towing sticker looked slapped on the property. Like, I guess this is exactly why sovereign justice had to be a thing, because nobody else is going to teach these petty tyrants a lesson. Anyway, let's see how this plays out.
The sound of 3 inches of solid forged steel violently snapping under 14,000 pounds of tension is not something you easily forget. It doesn't just ring in your ears, it reverberates right through your ribs, shaking the enamel on your teeth. It's a terrifying, beautiful, chaotic symphony of mechanical failure. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of sweltering, air thick as soup Florida day where even the iguanas look like they want to give up and move to Ohio. I was sitting in a faded green lawn chair at the edge of my driveway, a sweating glass of iced tea in my right hand, my phone recording in my left. In front of me, a 2-ton commercial-grade tow truck was currently performing a maneuver I like to call the Boca Raton belly flop. The rear axle had just surrendered to the laws of physics with a deafening crack, dropping the back half of the truck so hard onto the hot asphalt that a shower of sparks flew into my pristine Bermuda grass. Bus transmission fluid, black and slick, was already pooling under the chassis like dark blood from a slain dragon. The driver, a guy whose neck was thicker than his thighs and who smelled vaguely of stale black and milds and regret, was screaming a string of obscenities that would have made a sailor blush. He was dancing around the side of his ruined rig, ripping off his greasy baseball cap and throwing it into the street. I just took a slow, calculated sip of my iced tea. The ice clinked pleasantly against the glass. It tasted like victory. It tasted like justice. But to really understand how a man ends up drinking Lipton while a repo truck bleeds out in his driveway, we have to rewind exactly 72 hours. Welcome to Boca Raton, Florida. If you've never been, picture a place where the humidity sits at a constant 90%, and the average age is somewhere between retired and cryogenically frozen. And the lawns are manicured with the kind of aggressive precision usually reserved for military operations. It is a land of pastel polo shirts, aggressive golf cart driving, and the most militant, overfunded, power-hungry homeowners associations on the face of God's green earth. I live in a neighborhood called Whispering Pines. There are no pines here, and nobody whispers. They mostly just yell at landscapers. As I had recently acquired a boat. Now, when I say boat, I need you to lower your expectations. Lower them again. Keep going until you hit the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I bought a 1998 Bayliner off a guy on Craigslist who looked like he hadn't slept since the Bush administration. It had no engine, the seats were chewed to foam by raccoons, and the fiberglass hull was a faded, chalky yellow that looked like a smoker's teeth. It was, for all intents and purposes, a floating dumpster. But it was my floating dumpster, and I planned to gut it, rebuild it, and eventually take it down to the Keys to bother the manatees. Because I don't hate myself enough to pay marina storage fees for a boat that doesn't run, I towed it home on a rusty single-axle trailer and parked it right in my driveway. I figured I would spend the weekend power washing the decade of swamp grime off the hull before moving it to the backyard behind the fence. I parked it at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. By 10:45 a.m., the eye of Sauron was upon me. Her name was Brenda. She was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and she wore that title like a 4-star general's rank. Brenda was a woman in her late 60s who possessed a haircut that defied gravity. A rigid, hair-sprayed helmet of ash-blonde spikes. She always wore sensible tennis shoes and capri pants, and she carried a silver clipboard that I'm convinced she slept with. I was up to my elbows in soapy water and scrubbing away at a patch of algae that seemed to be actively fighting back when the shadow fell over me. "Excuse me?" a voice chirped. It wasn't a friendly chirp. It was the chirp of a smoke detector with a dying battery at 3 in the morning. I slowly turned around, dropping my sponge into the bucket. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day to boil alive in our own sweat, isn't it?" She didn't smile. Brenda's facial muscles hadn't formed a genuine smile since the Reagan administration, and she tapped a manicured finger against her clipboard. "Jack, we have a situation here." "Do we?" I asked, wiping my forehead with the back of my arm. "Did Gary down the street paint his mailbox eggshell instead of ecru again? Because I told you, I'll hold him down while you make the citizen's arrest." "This isn't a joke, Jack," she said, her voice dropping an octave into her serious HOA business tone. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at the bayliner. "What is that?" "Well, Brenda, and I'm no marine biologist, but I believe it's a boat." "It is a marine vessel," she corrected, as if using the legal term somehow gave her the upper hand. "And according to Section 4, Paragraph B, Clause 3 of the Whispering Pines Community Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, no marine vessels, recreational vehicles, or non-functional automotive chassis may be stored, parked, or otherwise situated in plain view from the municipal roadway." I leaned against the side of the hull, crossing my arms. "Brenda, I literally parked it here 45 minutes ago. I'm cleaning it. I'm moving it behind the privacy fence tomorrow." "The bylaws do not state a grace period, Jack," she said, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "The presence of this eyesore is actively degrading the property values of this entire cul-de-sac. It looks like a shipwreck." "It's a work in progress," I countered. "And frankly, I think it adds character. A little nautical flair. We're in Florida, so Brenda, embrace the maritime heritage." "I am issuing a verbal warning," she said, ignoring my charm entirely. She scribbled something furiously on her clipboard. I could almost hear the pen carving into the paper. "If this marine vessel is not removed from community sightlines within 24 hours, I will be forced to exercise the association's right to utilize our contracted towing service to cure the violation at the owner's expense." "You're going to tow a boat out of my own driveway?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I'm washing it?" "We have a contract with Predator Towing," she said, a smug little smirk finally breaking through the Botox. "They are very efficient. 24 hours, Jack. I'm not playing games." She turned on her sensible heels and marched down the driveway, her posture rigid, radiating the kind of self-righteous energy that could power a small city. I watched her go, the soapy water dripping off my hands. I wasn't just annoyed. I was intrigued. You see, when someone like Brenda tries to wield a tiny scrap of bureaucratic power like a broadsword, it activates a very specific, petty part of my brain. It's the part of my brain that created sovereign justice. You don't threaten a man's swamp trash boat on his own property. And I spent the rest of the day cleaning the boat, deliberately taking my time. I scrubbed every inch, whistling loudly every time Brenda walked her miniature poodle past my house. I didn't move it. When the sun went down, I went inside, took a shower, and went to sleep. I woke up at 6 a.m. on Sunday to get a glass of water. I glanced out the front window at the driveway. There it was, glowing in the early morning light like a radioactive beacon, a massive neon orange sticker, roughly the size of a dinner plate, was plastered directly onto the port side of the boat's hull. I threw open the front door and walked out in my bare feet. The sticker was one of those industrial-grade, impossible-to-remove monstrosities that tears into a million tiny, frustrating flakes if you try to peel it. It read, "Unauthorized marine vessel. This property is in violation of HOA bylaws, and you have 24 hours to remove this vessel, or it will be towed and impounded at your expense by Predator Towing, LLC. They had stamped the time on it. 2:14 a.m. Brenda, or one of her towing goons, had crept onto my property in the dead of night to deface my boat. They weren't just threatening me. They were trying to intimidate me. They wanted me to panic, hitch up the trailer, and hide my boat in shame. I didn't panic. I smiled. A slow, predatory smile. I walked back inside, brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat down at my computer. It was time to go to war. But I wasn't going to fight Brenda with arguments or screaming matches in the street. I was going to fight her with the most devastating weapon known to man: municipal zoning laws and federal statutes. I spent the next 4 hours descending into the maddening, labyrinthine world of local and federal legalese. I had 24 hours until Predator Towing showed up to ruin my day. I needed a shield. First, I looked at the Whispering Pines bylaws. Brenda was right. Section 4, paragraph B, clearly prohibited marine vessels. I couldn't argue that the boat wasn't a boat. It had a bow, a stern, and a hull. To the letter of the HOA law, I was in violation. But HOA bylaws don't exist in a vacuum. They are superseded by municipal law, which is superseded by state law, which is superseded by federal law. I just had to climb the ladder until I found a hammer big enough to smash Brenda's clipboard. When I started digging into Boca Raton's municipal zoning codes for residential properties, I was looking for exceptions, anything related to property storage, landscaping, or aesthetics. After 2 hours of reading dry, mind-numbing ordinances about fence heights and the allowable square footage of garden sheds, I found it. Boca Raton Municipal Code, Chapter 28, Article 5, Section 28-142, Exceptions to Residential Storage Restrictions. There was a subclause regarding outdoor art and sculptural installations. According to the city, a homeowner could keep objects on their front lawn that would otherwise violate storage ordinances, like old metal, large structures, or repurposed materials, so long as the object was formally declared and integrated as a permanent outdoor sculptural artwork. The city couldn't regulate taste. If you called it art, and it wasn't a public safety hazard, but those local ordinances protected your First Amendment right to display it. But an HOA could still argue it was just a boat disguised as art. I needed federal backing to make it bulletproof. Enter the Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. VARA. VARA is a beautiful piece of federal legislation designed to protect the moral rights of artists. Specifically, it grants the author of a work of visual art the right to prevent any intentional distortion, mutilation, or modification of that work which would be prejudicial to their honor or reputation. Furthermore, it prevents the destruction of a work of recognized stature. My brain started firing on all cylinders. What if the Bayliner wasn't a marine vessel anymore? What if its purpose as a mode of transportation was permanently revoked? What if it was, in fact, a mixed media sculpture representing the decay of the American middle-class dream in the face of rampant consumerism? What if I declared the boat an integrated permanent art piece, the HOA's marine vessel bylaw would be completely nullified. It wouldn't be a boat. It would be a sculpture. And if Predator Towing attempted to move it, drag it, or impound it, they wouldn't just be towing a boat. They would be illegally mutilating and destroying a federally protected work of visual art. It was a brilliant legal loophole, a perfect trap. But there was one glaring flaw in my plan. And I could wave all the VARA documentation and municipal codes in the world at a tow truck driver, and there was a 99% chance he would just laugh, hook up the winch, and drag my art down the street anyway. Tow truck drivers for companies like Predator don't care about federal art statutes. They care about their $250 impound fee. They tow first and let the courts sort it out later. If I wanted to truly win this, if I wanted to execute a flawless sovereign justice victory, I couldn't just rely on the law to protect the boat. I had to rely on physics. I had to make the boat physically impossible to steal. I had to make it a permanent, immovable fixture of the earth. I needed weight, mass, an ungodly axle-snapping amount of weight. I looked at the specs of a standard light-duty commercial wrecker, the kind Predator towing would send into a residential neighborhood. Their safe working load limit for a wheel lift or a winch drag was usually around 7,000 to 10,000 pounds. The fiberglass bay liner weighed maybe 1,500 pounds empty. The trailer weighed another 500. 2,000 pounds was nothing for a wrecker. It would glide out of my driveway like a leaf on a breeze. I needed to add at least 10,000 pounds to the hull. Quickly. I opened a new tab on my browser and typed in a search query that would change the course of my weekend and Brenda's life. Oh, forever. Same-day bulk concrete delivery near me. I found a local supplier that operated on Sundays. I did some rapid mental math. A cubic yard of standard concrete weighs about 4,000 pounds. The hull of my gutted bay liner had a volume of roughly 3 to 4 cubic yards before it would spill over the gunnels. 3 cubic yards of concrete would add 12,000 pounds to the vessel. Added to the existing weight, the total package would sit at around 14,000 pounds. A dense, solid, as immovable brick shaped like a 1998 bay liner. It was perfect. The concrete would serve 2 purposes. First, it legally solidified my VARA claim. By filling the hull with concrete, I was permanently and irrevocably destroying its function as a marine vessel. It could never float again. It was, undeniably, a stationary sculpture. Second, it turned my boat into a landmine for any tow truck arrogant enough to ignore my warnings. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Sun State Ready Mix. A gruff voice answered on the 3rd ring. Sun State, Mike speaking. Mike, I said, my voice steady, pulsing with the thrill of impending malicious compliance. I have an emergency landscaping project. I need 3 cubic yards of high-density, fast-setting structural concrete delivered to residential Boca Raton, today, as soon as humanly possible. It's Sunday, pal, Mike grunted. Emergency pours cost time and a half. Well, plus delivery fee. You're looking at close to $800. I don't care if it costs 1,000, I told him. I need it poured in the next 4 hours. What are you pouring? A patio? A driveway extension? We gotta know if we need the boom pump or just the chute. Neither, I said, glancing out the window at the bright orange sticker glowing menacingly in the morning sun. I need you to pour it directly into the hull of a 19-foot fiberglass boat. There was a long and heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Mike breathing. Say that again? He finally asked. I need 3 yards of concrete poured into a boat in my driveway, I repeated clearly. Right up to the top. I want it filled like a bathtub. Buddy. Mike trailed off, the confusion evident in his rough voice. You fill a boat with 3 yards of mix. That fiberglass might just crack right open. And even if it holds, that thing is never, ever going to float again. It's going to weigh as much as a dump truck. Mike, I said, letting a wide, manic grin spread across my face. That is exactly the point. Can you do it or not? Another pause. Then a heavy sigh. You got the money, I got the mud. Text me the address. We'll be there by noon." I hung up the phone and walked over to my printer. I had documents to draft. I needed to officially title my new sculpture. I typed out a formal declaration of artistic intent, naming the piece, "The Immovable Object," a study in bureaucratic overreach. I printed it out, signed it, and slipped it into a clear plastic sheet protector. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the concrete, and then the inevitable arrival of predator towing. By 11:45 a.m., the quiet, oppressive Sunday stillness of Whispering Pines was shattered by the grinding roar of a diesel engine. I mean, you literally couldn't miss it. A massive, 10-wheel Sun State. Ready-mix truck came lumbering around the corner of the cul-de-sac, its huge cylindrical drum slowly rotating, churning up the salvation to my bureaucratic nightmare. The truck was covered in a thick layer of dried gray dust, a stark contrast to the pristine, pressure-washed driveways of my neighbors. I could see blinds twitching in living room windows up and down the street. Brenda was probably having heart palpitations, which, honestly, was just a nice little bonus. The truck hissed to a stop right at the edge of my property line, its air brakes releasing with a sharp squeal. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Mike. Mike looked exactly like a guy whose job it is to deal with liquid rock all day under the brutal Florida sun. He was wearing heavy, cement-splattered work boots, faded jeans, and a neon yellow high-visibility shirt that was stained with sweat. He had a thick, graying mustache and a look of profound, existential weariness in his eyes. He slammed the truck door, pulled a clipboard out from under his arm, and walked up my driveway, his eyes locked on the sad, gutted 1998 Bayliner sitting on its rusty trailer. He stopped a few feet away from me, looked at the boat, looked at the bright orange towing sticker, and then finally looked at me. He took off his mirrored sunglasses and wiped his forehead with the back of a calloused hand. "You're the guy?" Mike asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'm the guy," I said, stepping forward with a welcoming smile. "Jack, thanks for coming out on a Sunday, Mike. I really appreciate it." Mike didn't smile back. He just gestured toward the Bayliner with his clipboard. "I guess I just need to clarify this before I start running the shoot, Jack. Because my dispatcher told me you wanted 3 yards poured into a fiberglass hull. I thought maybe he misheard you, or maybe I was having a stroke. But looking at you, and looking at this thing, I mean, you're actually serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious, Mike," I said, leaning casually against the side of the boat. 3 cubic yards, right into the belly of the beast. Level it off just below the gunnels." Mike took a deep breath, like a doctor about to deliver bad news. "Jack, listen to me. I've poured foundations. I've poured driveways. I once poured a solid concrete bunker for a guy who thought the Y2K bug was coming back around for round 2, but I have never, and in 30 years of doing this, poured mud into a boat." He walked over and kicked one of the dry, rotted tires on the single-axle trailer. "This trailer is rated for maybe 2,000–3,000 pounds, if you're lucky. 3 yards of structural mix is going to weigh 12,000 pounds. You understand that, right? The second I start dropping that kind of weight in there, these tires are going to blow out like gunshots. The axle is going to bow. Mazas, the suspension leaf springs are going to flatten like pancakes. Hell, the fiberglass hull itself might just split right down the keel and dump liquid concrete all over your nice driveway." "I've thought of that," I said, gesturing to a neat stack of heavy-duty cinder blocks and thick wooden 4x4 posts I had arranged near the garage. "That's why we're going to block it up first. We're taking the weight completely off the trailer's suspension and tires. We'll shim it right under the frame rails and the hull's stringers. As for the fiberglass splitting, well, it's a risk I'm willing to take for the sake of art." Mike stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Art, he repeated flatly. Exactly, I said, pulling my freshly printed plastic-sleeved declaration of artistic intent from my back pocket and handing it to him. This isn't a boat anymore, Mike. It's a permanent. At a stationary sculpture entitled The Immovable Object, a study in bureaucratic overreach. I am legally protecting it under the Visual Artists' Rights Act. But to do that, it needs to be permanently altered. It needs to lose its function as a vessel. Mike looked at the paper, then back at the boat, and then back at the bright orange Predator towing sticker. A slow, understanding dawn seemed to break across his weathered face. He looked down the street, perhaps anticipating an angry HOA board member charging at us. "Somebody trying to tow your junk, Jack?" he asked, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at the corner of his mustache. "They gave me 24 hours, I said, tapping the orange sticker. "They think they're going to drag it away at 2 a.m. Mike chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "And you're going to make it weigh 14,000 pounds, so the wrecker breaks its own back trying to pull it." "Like I said, Mike, it's a study in overreach." Mike handed the paper back to me. He looked at the boat with a newfound sense of professional respect. "Honestly, I think you're insane. But I charge by the hour, and my waiver says I'm not liable for damages to the receptacle if the customer dictates the pour. You sign the release, and I'll fill this plastic tub until it overflows." "Where do I sign?" I asked, pulling a pen from my pocket. For the next 30 minutes, Mike and I worked like a pit crew, and we used a pair of heavy hydraulic floor jacks to lift the trailer frame, sliding the cinder blocks and 4x4 posts underneath the main structural points of the trailer and the boat's hull. We took the tires completely off the ground. Once the entire setup was resting on a solid, unyielding foundation of masonry and timber, Mike gave it a firm shake. It didn't budge. It was solid. "All right," Mike grunted, walking back to his massive truck. "Stand back. It's gonna get messy." He climbed up the back ladder of the truck, adjusted the metal chutes, and swung them out so they hung directly over the center console of the gutted bayliner. He pulled a lever, and the drum started to rotate faster, mixing the heavy slurry inside. "Here comes the mud!" Mike yelled over the roar of the engine. He yanked the release handle, and I literally felt the ground shake as the first wave of high-density structural concrete cascaded down the metal chute and slammed into the bottom of the fiberglass hull. The sound was incredible. A wet, heavy, percussive thud that echoed off the stucco walls of the surrounding houses. The gray sludge began to spread out, swallowing the remains of the rotted decking, filling the bilge, creeping up the sides of the inner hull. The smell of wet cement, lime, and crushed stone filled the humid Florida air. It was a beautiful industrial scent. I watched, mesmerized, as the weight piled on. The boat began to creak and groan. An unsettling chorus of popping fiberglass and stressing metal. The wooden blocks under the frame bit hard into the asphalt of my driveway, taking the immense load. Mike adjusted the chute, directing the flow to ensure an even distribution from bow to stern. He was an artist in his own right, managing the heavy, all unforgiving material with practiced precision. "How's she holding?" Mike yelled down to me. "She's taking it!" I shouted back, inspecting the sides of the hull. The fiberglass was bulging slightly under the hydrostatic pressure of the wet concrete, but it wasn't cracking. The old girl was holding together. For 20 minutes, the concrete flowed. 3 cubic yards is an abstract concept until you see it poured into a space meant for people and life jackets. It filled the entire seating area, at completely burying the center console base, rising higher and higher until it was just 2 inches shy of the top edge of the gunnels. Mike shut the valve. The roar of the truck subsided to an idle rumble. We both stood there, looking at the monstrosity we had just created. The boat was now essentially a custom-shaped, fiberglass-coated foundation block. The surface of the concrete was a smooth, flat expanse of wet gray, shimmering slightly in the harsh afternoon sun. "Well," Mike said, was wiping down his chute with a hose, "it's definitely not going to float, and it's definitely not going anywhere. I hope your driveway is reinforced, Jack, because if you ever try to move that thing, you're going to take a layer of asphalt with it." "That's a problem for future, Jack," I said, handing him his signed paperwork. "Today, we celebrate the creation of art." Mike shook his head, laughing softly as he climbed back into the cab of his truck. "You're a piece of work, buddy. Good luck with the tow truck." He blasted his air horn once, a deafening, triumphant blast that probably woke up every retiree within a 2-mile radius, and rumbled his way out of the cul-de-sac. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in my lawn chair, drinking water, and watching the concrete cure. It's an exothermic reaction, meaning it generates heat as it hardens. By sunset, I could place my hand on the outside of the fiberglass hull and feel the intense, radiating warmth from the thousands of pounds of curing stone inside. It was cooking. It was hardening into an impenetrable, immovable mass. I went to bed that night with a sense of profound, tranquil peace. I didn't even set an alarm. I knew the trap was set. The next morning, Monday, dawned hot and sticky. I woke up at 7 a.m., made my coffee, and walked out to the driveway. The boat looked exactly the same from the street. If you were driving by, you wouldn't notice a difference. But if you walked up and looked over the edge, you would see a solid, flat floor of cured, pale gray concrete. I tapped it with a steel wrench. It rang out with a dull, solid clink. It was like hitting a sidewalk. The 24-hour warning on the orange sticker had expired at 2:14 a.m. They hadn't come in the night. They were waiting for the morning, probably assuming I was at work, leaving the driveway clear for a quick, uncontested snatch and grab. I set up my lawn chair. I brought out a pitcher of iced tea. I made sure my phone was fully charged and had enough storage for a 4K video. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the Predator arrived. It was a sleek, aggressive-looking Ford F450 commercial wrecker. It was painted a glossy, intimidating black, with neon green lettering on the side that read, "Predator Towing and Recovery, 24/7 Enforcement." It had a heavy-duty hydraulic wheel lift on the back, the kind designed to slide under the tires of a car and snatch it up in under 60 seconds. The truck crept into the cul-de-sac like a shark smelling blood in the water. It circled the island once, the driver clearly casing the scene, before backing up and angling its rear end directly toward my driveway, perfectly aligned with the front tongue of my boat trailer. The air brakes hissed. The truck went into park. I hit record on my phone and stood up. The door of the wrecker opened, and out stepped the antagonist of our story. I'll call him Vinny. Vinny looked like the kind of guy whose entire personality was based on energy drinks and unearned confidence. He was wearing tactical pants, a tight black polo shirt with the company logo, and heavy work boots. He was aggressively chewing a piece of gum, his jaw working overtime, and he had a Bluetooth earpiece permanently welded to his right ear. He didn't even look at me at first, and he just swaggered toward the front of the boat trailer, pulling a pair of heavy leather gloves from his back pocket. He reached for the remote control clipped to his belt to lower the hydraulic stinger. "Morning," I called out, my voice bright and cheerful, stepping right into his path. I kept the phone raised, clearly recording his face as the truck and the license plate. Vinny stopped, looking me up and down with an expression of sheer, unfiltered annoyance. "You the owner?" he grunted, not stopping his chewing. "I am the owner of this property, yes?" I said smoothly. "And I'm recording this interaction for legal and liability purposes." Vinny rolled his eyes so hard I thought he might detach a retina. Yeah, everybody's got a camera these days. Look, buddy, save the speech. HOA called it in. You got the sticker. Time's up. I'm hooking it up and taking it to the impound lot over on 4th Street. You want it back? It's a $250 drop fee, plus $50 a day for storage. You can come pay the cashier. Now step aside so I can do my job." He tried to step around me, reaching for the tongue of the trailer. I shifted, blocking him again. "Sir, before you attach any equipment to my property, I am formally issuing you a legal and safety warning." "I don't care about your warnings, pal," Vinny sneered, his patience already evaporating. He pointed a gloved finger at the bright orange sticker. "Read the tag. It's an unauthorized marine vessel. I have a signed authorization from the property manager. You're interfering with a legal tow. You want me to call the cops?" "I would absolutely love it if you called the cops," I said, my smile never faltering. "But before you do, you need to listen to me very carefully, because what you are about to attempt is both illegal and incredibly dangerous for you and your equipment." Vinny scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "Dangerous? Give me a break. Why I tow F-250s all day long? This piece of plastic garbage weighs less than my breakfast." "First of all," I said, holding up my plastic-sleeved declaration, making sure it was clearly visible to my phone's camera. "This is no longer a marine vessel. As of yesterday, this object has been formally reclassified and registered as a permanent outdoor sculptural artwork entitled The Immovable Object. It is protected under the Federal Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. Thus, it is completely exempt from the Whispering Pines HOA marine vessel bylaws. If you attempt to move it, you are committing a federal offense by attempting to mutilate and destroy protected art." Vinny stared at me for 3 seconds, blinking. Then he burst out laughing. It was a harsh, mocking sound. "Art? You're calling this junk art? What, did you paint a smiley face on the steering wheel? That's the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard. You sovereign citizen types are all the same. Federal law this, maritime law that. It's a boat, idiot, and it's going on my truck." "I am officially informing you of its status," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even and calm, playing strictly for the camera. "I am denying you consent to touch or alter this sculpture. Secondly, and more importantly for your immediate physical safety, I am officially warning you regarding the weight of this object." Vinny was already walking past me, heading for the controls on the side of his truck. Yeah, it's real heavy. Step back." "Sir, I am warning you as the operator of a commercial motor vehicle," I said, raising my voice to ensure the microphone picked it up perfectly over the idling diesel engine. "That object exceeds the safe working load limit of your wrecker's wheel lift and winch system. Do not attempt to lift it." Vinny paused with his hand on the hydraulic levers. He looked back at me, a cruel, arrogant smirk on his face. "Buddy, this is an F450 Super Duty. My boom is rated for 10,000 pounds. My winch can pull 12. That plastic tub and that rusty trailer weigh maybe 2 grand combined. I could drag that thing sideways through your living room if I wanted to." "I am stating for the record that you are factually incorrect about the weight of the load," I said, taking a calculated step back, ensuring I had a wide angle of the impending disaster. "You have failed to verify the load weight. If you proceed, well, You are operating with gross negligence and assuming all liability for the catastrophic failure of your equipment." "Get out of the way!" Vinny snapped, finally losing his temper. He yanked a lever. The heavy steel crossbar of the wheel lift lowered toward the ground with a hydraulic whine. Vinny grabbed the heavy metal chains from the back of the truck. He didn't even bother trying to slide the lift under the tires, partly because I had removed the tires, leaving only the rims resting slightly above the cinder blocks, but he was too angry and rushed to even notice that detail. Instead, he went for the quick and dirty method. He pulled the heavy steel hook from his wrecker's winch, dragged the thick steel cable out, and clamped the hook directly onto the bow eye of the bayliner, the heavy steel ring at the front of the boat, used for winching it onto a trailer. He was going to dead drag it, and he was going to use his winch to pull the entire trailer forward off the blocks and drag it up onto his stinger. It was exactly what I wanted him to do. "Last warning, Vinny," I called out, using the name stitched on his shirt. "Do not engage that winch." "Go inside and cry about it, Art Boy," Vinny sneered. He walked back to his control panel at the rear driver's side of the wrecker. He grabbed the lever that controlled the main winch drum. He didn't ease into it. He didn't test the tension. Yet he just violently yanked the lever backward, commanding the hydraulic motor to apply maximum pulling force to the steel cable. The cable snapped taut instantly, lifting off the ground and forming a rigid, vibrating line of steel between the truck and the boat. The winch motor began to whine. A high-pitched, agonizing sound of mechanical strain. The boat didn't move a millimeter. The 14,000 pounds of solid concrete anchored it to the earth like a geological formation. Vinny frowned. He looked at the cable, then at the boat. He revved the truck's engine, sending more power to the hydraulic pump. The winch whined louder, a screaming pitch of metal grinding against metal. The front suspension of the heavy-duty F450 actually squatted down, the rear end lifting slightly as the truck fought against an impossible anchor. The heavy steel bow eye on the front of the fiberglass boat began to stretch and deform under the immense tension, but it held. "What the?" Vinny muttered, as stepping back from the controls. He looked genuinely confused. He checked his parking brake. He checked his PTO engagement. Everything was correct. He just couldn't comprehend why a hollow fiberglass boat wasn't skidding across the driveway. He hadn't looked inside. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance and his rush to steal my property that he hadn't bothered to look over the gunnels to see the 3 cubic yards of solid rock sitting in the hull. "It's too heavy, Vinny," I said calmly. "Still recording." "Release the tension." "Shut up," Vinny yelled, his face turning red. His pride was on the line now. He wasn't going to let some guy with a camera beat him. He made the worst decision of his life. He locked the winch drum, keeping the immense thousands of pounds of tension on the cable. Then he stormed up to the cab of the truck, ripped the door open, and climbed into the driver's seat. He was going to use the truck's drivetrain. He was going to try and muscle it out using the diesel engine. I took 3 rapid steps backward, putting myself safely behind the sturdy brick pillar of my mailbox. I heard Vinny slam the transmission into drive. I saw the exhaust stack belch a thick cloud of black diesel smoke. I heard him floor the accelerator. The F450 roared. The massive dual rear tires spun on the asphalt, screaming and smoking as they fought for traction. The truck lurched forward an inch, pulling the cable incredibly, but terrifyingly tight. The tension was astronomical. Something had to give. It wasn't going to be the 14,000 pounds of concrete. It was the truck. There was a sound like a cannon firing in a library, a sharp, violently loud bang that echoed off the houses and rattled my teeth. The rear of the tow truck violently exploded downward. Under the impossible torque of the spinning wheels combined with the immovable anchor of the winch cable, the rear axle of the F450 simply couldn't take it. But the heavy steel axle tube snapped clean in half. The drive shaft sheared off the differential with a sickening crunch. The entire rear suspension collapsed instantly, and the heavy steel bed of the wrecker slammed down onto the pavement with a bone-jarring crash. The rear tires splayed outward at unnatural broken angles, jammed up into the wheel wells. A fountain of black oil, red transmission fluid, and shattered gear teeth exploded out from underneath the truck, splattering across my driveway and pooling rapidly on the hot street. The engine roared for another split second before stalling out completely, leaving a sudden, ringing silence in the neighborhood, broken only by the hiss of leaking fluids and the frantic, panicked screaming of Vinny from inside the cab. I slowly lowered my phone from my face, a massive, uncontainable grin spreading from ear to ear. I mean, honestly, it was beautiful. I took a slow, calculated sip of my iced tea. The ice clinked pleasantly against the glass. Checkmate. Vinny practically fell out of the cab of his ruined F45. Oh, his heavy work boots slipping and sliding in the massive, iridescent puddle of transmission fluid that was rapidly expanding across the asphalt. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire livelihood evaporate in a cloud of black diesel smoke and shattered steel. He ripped his Bluetooth earpiece out and threw it at the ground, his face a terrifying shade of mottled plum. "You crazy son of a—" he screamed, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling, grease-stained finger directly at my face. "You booby-trapped it! You rigged my truck! I'm calling the cops! I'm pressing charges! You're going to jail, you hear me?" I didn't move from my safe spot behind the brick mailbox. I just adjusted my grip on my phone, making sure I kept his completely unhinged, vein-popping meltdown perfectly centered in the frame. "I literally warned you, Vinny," I said, pitching my voice to be as calm, reasonable, and infuriatingly polite as humanly possible. "I have it all on video. I warned you 3 separate times. I told you it exceeded your load limit. You told me my boat weighed less than your breakfast. I guess you must eat a lot of structural concrete." Vinny lunged forward, his fists balled up, but before he could close the distance and turn this from a civil dispute into an assault charge, a high-pitched, warbling shriek shattered the morning air. What is the meaning of this?" Enter Brenda. She came speed-walking down the sidewalk from 3 houses away, her sensible tennis shoes slapping furiously against the concrete. She was wearing a matching pastel pink velour tracksuit, which, given that it was already 85 degrees out, was a choice. And her gravity-defying hair was quivering with righteous HOA fury. She clutched her silver clipboard to her chest like a shield. She stopped dead in her tracks at the end of my driveway, thus taking in the scene. The massive commercial wrecker, completely broken in half. The rear tires splayed out like a dropped toddler. The gallons of hazardous fluids soaking into the municipal street, and me, calmly standing there with my iced tea. "Jack!" Brenda gasped, her eyes wide with horror. "What have you done to this man's truck? This is a quiet neighborhood. This is a disaster zone." "I didn't do anything, Brenda," I said, taking a sip of my drink. Vinny here just tried to tow a 14,000-pound immovable art installation with a truck rated for 10. Physics did the rest. It's not my fault he skipped science class." 14,000 pounds? Vinny choked out, spinning around to look at the boat. He finally did what he should have done 20 minutes ago. He marched over to the side of the bay liner, grabbed the gunnel, and hoisted himself up on his tiptoes to look inside the hull. And I watched the exact moment his soul left his body. He saw the solid, flat, pale gray expanse of cured industrial concrete, filled right up to the brim. He slowly lowered himself back down to the ground. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. "You filled it with cement," he finally whispered, his voice hollow. "You filled a hollow fiberglass boat with solid cement." "Concrete, actually," I corrected him cheerfully. "Oh, high-density structural mix. About 3 cubic yards. I commissioned it yesterday. Beautiful piece, don't you think?" Vinny didn't answer. He just pulled his phone out of his pocket with shaking hands and dialed 911. "Yeah," he barked into the receiver. "I need an officer at Whispering Pines. Now. I got a homeowner who just intentionally destroyed a $70,000 commercial wrecker. Yeah. Send backup." "Please do," Brenda chimed in, her voice shrill and triumphant. She pointed her pen at me. "You are in so much trouble, Jack. The fines the association is going to levy against you for this environmental hazard alone will bankrupt you. We are going to put a lien on your house so fast it'll make your head spin." "Brenda, unless your bylaws cover commercial vehicle maintenance on public roadways, I suggest you take a step back," I said. "This is between me, Vinny, and the Department of Transportation now." We waited in a tense, us beautiful silence for about 12 minutes. Vinny paced back and forth, muttering violently to himself and kicking at the tires of his broken truck. Brenda stood at the edge of my lawn, furiously scribbling notes on her clipboard, occasionally glaring at me like I had personally insulted her ancestors. I just kept recording, occasionally panning the camera down to capture the beautiful, tragic wreckage of the F450's rear axle. Finally, the cavalry arrived. A white Boca Raton Police Department SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac, its light bar flashing silently. A tall, broad-shouldered cop with a neatly trimmed mustache and a look of profound exhaustion stepped out of the vehicle. His name tag read, Martinez. He took one look at the broken tow truck, the massive fluid spill, the gutted boat, and the 3 of us standing around it, and he just let out a long, heavy sigh. "All right," Officer Martinez said, resting his hands on his duty belt as he approached. "Who called it in?" "I did, officer," Vinny practically shouted, sprinting over to the cop. "This guy right here, he booby-trapped his boat. I came here on a legal, authorized tow requested by the HOA, and he filled the hull with solid cement to intentionally break my equipment. My axle is snapped in half, my drive shaft is gone. He destroyed my rig." Martinez looked at the boat, then looked at me. "Is that true, sir? Did you fill that vessel with concrete?" "I absolutely did. Officer Martinez," I said, stepping forward. "But I didn't booby-trap anything. I created a permanent sculptural installation on my own private property." Brenda let out a loud theatrical scoff. "It's a boat! It's an eyesore! He's in violation of community bylaws." Martinez held up a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, let me handle this. Sir, you're saying you filled a boat with concrete for art?" "Yes, sir," I said, reaching into my back pocket and pulling out my neatly folded stack of documents. And I handed him the plastic-sleeved declaration of artistic intent. Here is the formal declaration. The piece is titled The Immovable Object. According to the Boca Raton Municipal Code, Chapter 28, Article 5, Section 28-142, which outlines exceptions to residential storage restrictions, homeowners are permitted to maintain heavy materials on their property if they are formally integrated as permanent outdoor sculptural artwork, furthermore, as an integrated sculpture, and it is protected under the Federal Visual Artists' Rights Act of 1990. Martinez took the paper, reading it over slowly. He raised an eyebrow. "Vara?" "Exactly," I nodded. "Which means it is legally not a marine vessel. It is a sculpture. The HOA's bylaw restricting marine vessels no longer applies. The towing order was entirely fraudulent." That is ridiculous, Brenda shrieked. He's making a mockery of our community standards. Ma'am, I said quiet, Martinez warned her, his tone sharpening. He looked back at Vinny. Okay, let's say it's art. Why is your truck broken in half in the middle of the street? Because he didn't tell me it weighed 14,000 pounds, Vinny yelled. He just let me hook up to it. Officer, I have the entire 10-minute interaction on video, right here on my phone, I said, tapping the screen. I verbally warned this man 3 separate times that the object exceeded the safe working load limit of his commercial vehicle. But I explicitly told him not to engage his winch. He told me, and I quote, I could drag that thing sideways through your living room if I wanted to. He then bypassed standard safety protocols, refused to verify the weight of his load, and deliberately engaged his equipment against my explicit safety warnings. I handed Martinez another piece of paper. I also have a copy of Florida Statute 715.07 right here. Thus, it clearly states that a towing company must provide strict statutory notice and allow the vehicle owner a reasonable opportunity to remove the property themselves before hooking up, if the owner is present. I was present. I was standing right here. He ignored the statute and attempted an illegal snatch and grab of my private property. Martinez looked at the statute, looked at my declaration of art, and then looked at Vinny. The cop was starting to put the puzzle pieces together, and he did not look pleased with the tow truck driver. Is this true? Martinez asked Vinny, his voice dropping into that dangerous, quiet cop tone. Did he warn you about the weight? He said it was heavy, but people lie to get out of tows all the time, Vinny stammered, his confidence rapidly evaporating. I thought he was just stalling. It's a hollow fiberglass boat. How was I supposed to know he filled it with cement? Because you are a commercially licensed driver, operating a Class 4 heavy-duty vehicle, I interjected smoothly, looking directly at the camera. According to Department of Transportation regulations, specifically FMCSA Code 392.9, it is the sole responsibility of the commercial driver to ensure their cargo is properly distributed and adequately secured, and to verify the weight of the load before operating the vehicle. Since you failed to verify the load, you operated with gross negligence. You destroyed your own truck through sheer arrogance. Officer Martinez sighed again, taking off his hat and running a hand through his hair. He walked over to the back of the F450, inspecting the sheared steel of the axle and the massive puddle of transmission fluid. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm going to need public works out here at Whispering Pines for a major hazmat spill cleanup, yeah. Transmission fluid and oil, over a dozen gallons on the municipal roadway. He clipped the radio back to his belt and turned to face Vinny. Well, Vinny, Martinez said, pulling his ticket book out of his breast pocket. Here's how this is going to go. This gentleman committed no crime. He modified property that he legally owns, on land that he legally owns. He warned you about the hazard. You chose to ignore it. But he destroyed my truck, Vinny protested, and his voice cracking with desperation. No, Martinez corrected him firmly. You destroyed your truck. You failed to verify the weight of a load before attempting to haul it. That is a direct violation of DOT safety regulations. Therefore, I am citing you for the unsafe operation of a commercial motor vehicle. He started writing furiously in his book. Furthermore, you just dumped roughly 15 gallons of highly toxic automotive fluids onto a city street and down a municipal storm drain. Besides, that is a massive environmental hazard. I am citing you for the illegal discharge of hazardous materials. The cleanup crew from Public Works is going to bill your company directly for the remediation. And let me tell you, they charge by the hour. And they aren't cheap. Vinny looked like he was about to physically vomit. He stumbled back against the side of his broken truck, his mouth hanging open. Brenda, realizing that the tide had completely turned, tried to salvage the situation. "Officer, what about the boat? He still has a boat in his driveway. The HOA demands it be removed." Martinez ripped the 2 citations out of his book and shoved them into Vinny's chest. Then he turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, as far as the law is concerned, based on the municipal exemptions this man has provided, that object is not a boat. It is a piece of art. If you want to argue that point, you need to hire a lawyer and take him to civil court. Granted, the police department does not enforce homeowners association bylaws. Have a nice day." Martinez tipped his hat to me, walked back to his cruiser, and sat inside, waiting for the hazmat crew to arrive. I turned the camera toward Brenda. She was standing there, shaking with rage, her clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. "Well, Brenda," I said, giving her my most brilliant, winning smile. "It looks like the immovable object is going to be a permanent fixture in the neighborhood. But don't worry, I'm thinking of painting it a nice, vibrant neon pink next week, just to really make it pop. Have a blessed day." Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek, turned on her heel, and practically sprinted back up the street toward her house. I turned the camera back to Vinny. He was sitting on the curb next to his shattered axle, his head buried in his hands, surrounded by the smell of his own failure. "And that, ladies and gentlemen," I said, "yo, speaking directly into the lens, is why you always read the fine print, and you never, ever try to tow a man's art." The aftermath of the Great Boca Raton boat incident was, frankly, legendary. Predator Towing had to hire a massive, heavy-duty rotator crane, the kind they use to flip over semi-trucks on the highway, just to come and lift their broken F450 out of my driveway. The cleanup crew from the city spent 4 hours scrubbing the street with industrial degreaser. And when all was said and done, Predator Towing was hit with over $5,000 in municipal fines for the hazmat spill and the DOT violations. Their insurance company sent an adjuster out to look at the truck. When the adjuster reviewed my video, which I happily provided to them, and saw Vinny explicitly ignoring safety warnings and intentionally overloading his equipment, they invoked a gross negligence clause in Predator's policy. The insurance company completely denied the claim, as Predator Towing had to eat the entire $30,000 repair bill for the broken axle, drivetrain, and suspension out of their own pocket. But I wasn't done yet. This is sovereign justice, after all. We don't just win, we make it hurt. I hired a shark of a local property lawyer and filed a civil suit against Predator Towing. My grounds: attempted destruction of protected artwork under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, emotional distress, and trespassing. It's because Vinny had attempted to dead drag the concrete boat. The heavy steel bow eye had bent, causing minor stress fractures in the surrounding fiberglass. I argued that his reckless actions had fundamentally compromised the structural integrity of my masterpiece. Predator Towing's lawyers took one look at the case, looked at the video, and immediately offered to settle out of court. They didn't want any part of a federal VERA lawsuit. They cut me a check for $12,000. As for Brenda and the HOA, they completely backed down. They sent me a very terse, legally vetted letter officially withdrawing their towing warning and acknowledging the unique artistic status of the installation in my driveway. Brenda wouldn't even look in my direction when she walked her dog. She would cross the street 3 houses down just to avoid making eye contact with the massive, concrete-filled monument to her own defeat. As I left the boat sitting in the driveway for exactly 29 days. I didn't paint it, I didn't touch it. I just let it sit there, radiating heat and malicious compliance, A daily reminder to every petty dictator with a clipboard that some people simply refuse to be bullied. On the morning of the 30th day, I used a portion of my settlement money to hire a commercial rigging crew. They brought out a 50-ton mobile crane, strapped massive nylon slings around the hull, and effortlessly lifted the 14,000-pound block of concrete onto the back of a specialized flatbed semi-trailer. I paid them to haul it directly to the county landfill. I didn't need it anymore. The point had been made. The tyrant had been overthrown. I stood in my now empty driveway, holding my camera out in front of me, the sun beating down on the pristine Florida asphalt. So, what did we learn today? I asked the lens, a satisfied smirk resting on my face. We learned that local zoning laws are your best friend. We learned that the Visual Artists' Rights Act is a beautiful, terrible weapon when wielded correctly. And most importantly, we learned that just because someone has a contract and a tow truck doesn't mean they have the right to ignore physics. I pointed a finger at the camera. If they try to push you around, don't just push back. Make yourself too heavy to move. Know your rights, read your statutes, and never let a Brenda tell you what is or isn't art. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll catch you on the next one.